I was sitting on my porch in Scottsdale, Arizona, drinking my morning coffee when I saw the demolition truck pull up to my house. At first, I thought they had the wrong address. Then, I saw the woman marching up my driveway with a clipboard and a look on her face that could curdle milk. "Are you Samuel Preston?" she asked, not waiting for me to answer. "I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Saguaro Ridge Homeowners Association. We sent you 3 notices about your paint violation. Since you failed to comply, we've hired this crew to remediate the issue at your expense." I set down my coffee and stood up slowly. The paint on my house was a soft desert tan, the exact same color it had been when I moved in 5 years ago. The exact same color as every other house on this street, because I knew that for a fact. I had built every single one of them. "What paint violation?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Patricia pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of my house. "The trim around your garage door is not the approved color. It's supposed to be Adobe Sunset, which is clearly stated in the HOA guidelines. Yours is clearly Desert Dawn. We've documented this violation 3 times over the past 2 months." I looked at my garage trim. It was the same beige color it had always been. The same color on every house in this development, because when my construction company built Saguaro Ridge 6 years ago, we used exactly one trim color for the entire neighborhood to save costs and maintain consistency. "That's the original color," I said. "I haven't painted anything." "Sir, I've been the HOA president for 8 months, and I know every detail of our community standards. That color is wrong, and it needs to be corrected immediately. Since you ignored our certified letters, the board voted to take emergency action." The demolition crew was already unloading equipment. A guy with a sledgehammer was walking toward my garage. "Hold on," I said, raising my hand. "Nobody's demolishing anything until we figure this out." Patricia crossed her arms. "Mr. Preston, the HOA bylaws give us the right to enter your property and correct violations if you fail to comply within the stated time frame. You had 60 days. The crew is here to remove the improperly painted trim and replace it with the correct color. The cost will be added to your HOA dues with a 20% administrative fee." I pulled out my own phone and called my office. My assistant, Marcus, picked up on the second ring. "Marcus, I need you to pull the original construction specs for Saguaro Ridge, specifically the exterior paint colors we used. Can you email them to me right now?" "Sure thing, boss. Give me 2 minutes." Patricia was tapping her foot. The demolition guy was still standing there with his sledgehammer, looking confused. "Madam," I said, "I'm the contractor who built this entire neighborhood, Preston Construction. Every house here, including yours, was built by my company. I'm telling you that this is the original color, and it matches every other house on this street." She laughed, actually laughed. "Mr. Preston, I don't care who you think you are. The HOA has standards and you're in violation. Now are you going to step aside or do I need to call the police?" My phone buzzed. Marcus had sent the specs. I opened the PDF and zoomed in on the paint schedule. There it was, clear as day. All garage trim, all houses, Sherwin-Williams Desert Dawn, color code SW7569. I showed her the document. "This is the original construction specification from Preston Construction, dated March 2020. Every house in Saguaro Ridge was built with this exact trim color, Desert Dawn. The same color that's on my garage right now." Patricia barely glanced at it. "That document is irrelevant. The HOA guidelines state Adobe Sunset, and that's what matters. The developer's choices don't supersede our current standards." "The developer's choices?" I couldn't help the edge in my voice. I was the developer. My company built this neighborhood, filed the original HOA documents, and established the architectural guidelines. I still have all the paperwork. "Then perhaps you should review those guidelines because they clearly state Adobe Sunset for all trim work. Now this is your last warning. Step aside or face additional fines for interfering with HOA enforcement actions." The sledgehammer guy looked at me apologetically. "Look, man, look, I'm just doing what I was hired to do. The lady paid us half up front." I held up a hand. "I understand. This isn't your fault. But I'm telling you right now, if you damage my property, I will sue you in the HOA. Give me 10 minutes to sort this out." Patricia pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police. You're trespassing on HOA business." "This is my property," I said. "You're the one who needs to leave. But go ahead and call them. I'd love to have an officer here to witness this. While she was calling, I texted Marcus again. Need you to bring the master HOA file for Saguaro Ridge to my house ASAP. Also bring the original paint samples we used. 20 minutes later, a Scottsdale police cruiser pulled up. Officer Chen got out, looking like he really didn't want to be there. I didn't blame him. HOA disputes were probably the worst part of his job. "What's going on here?" he asked. Patricia jumped in first. "Officer, this man is interfering with legitimate HOA enforcement. We have the legal right to correct violations on his property, and he's refusing to comply." Officer Chen turned to me. "Sir, I'm Samuel Preston. I own this house. The HOA claims my garage trim is the wrong color and sent a demolition crew without my permission. I'm telling them it's the original color from when the house was built, which I can prove because my company built it." The officer looked at the garage trim, then at the houses on either side. "It looks the same as those houses to me." "Exactly," I said. "Those houses are also in violation," Patricia said quickly. "We're addressing them in order of when the violations were reported." Officer Chen sighed. "Madam, if he's refusing access to his property, you can't force entry unless you have a court order. Do you have a court order?" "The HOA bylaws." "Do you have a court order?" Patricia's face was turning red. "No, but then the demolition crew needs to leave, and you folks need to work this out through proper legal channels." "Sir," he turned to me, "has she damaged your property?" "Not yet, but she was about to." "Madam, you need to take your crew and go. If you believe you have a legitimate claim, file it with the appropriate court. You can't just demolish someone's property because you say so." Marcus pulled up right then in his truck, carrying a large file box and a case of paint samples. Patricia glared at all of us like we'd personally ruined her day, then stormed off to her car. The demolition crew packed up their equipment, and the guy with the sledgehammer gave me a little wave as they drove away. Officer Chen stuck around long enough to make sure everyone left peacefully, then gave me his card. "If they come back without a court order, call me directly." After he left, Marcus and I spread out the documents on my dining room table. The original HOA guidelines I'd filed with the county in 2020 were crystal clear. All garage trim would be Sherwin-Williams Desert Dawn, SW7569. There was no mention of Adobe Sunset anywhere in the original documents. "Where is she getting this Adobe Sunset thing from?" Marcus asked. "That's what I want to know. Pull up the HOA website and see if they've posted updated guidelines." It took Marcus about 5 minutes to find it. The HOA had posted revised architectural guidelines 3 months ago, changing dozens of specifications including the garage trim color. At the bottom of the document was a note. All homeowners must bring their properties into compliance within 60 days of this revision. "They can't just unilaterally change the architectural standards," I said. "The original CC and Rs require a vote of at least 70% of homeowners to modify the architectural guidelines." Marcus scrolled through the meeting minutes posted on the website. According to this, they had a board meeting in February where they voted to update the guidelines. But I only see 5 people voting. Isn't that just the board? Yeah, the board can't change architectural standards on their own. They needed to hold a community vote. I pulled out the original HOA documents, the ones I'd filed when we first developed the neighborhood. The Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions was explicit. Changes to architectural guidelines required a 70% supermajority vote of all homeowners in the community. Saguaro Ridge had 147 houses. They would have needed approval from at least 103 homeowners. "This is completely invalid," Marcus said. "They just decided to change the rules and expected everyone to renovate their houses to match." I was already doing the math in my head. If Patricia was serious about enforcing these fake guidelines, she could potentially force every homeowner in Saguaro Ridge to repaint parts of their house. At an average cost of maybe $2,000 per house, plus the HOA's 20% administrative fee, that was nearly $350,000 that she was trying to extract from the neighborhood. "We need to figure out who else has been targeted," I said. I spent the rest of the morning walking around the neighborhood, knocking on doors. Most people were at work, but I managed to talk to about 30 homeowners. 11 of them had received violation notices in the past 3 months. The violations were all similar: garage trim color, front door color, mailbox posts, window shutters, all things that hadn't actually changed but supposedly didn't match the new guidelines. One woman, Janet Rodriguez, had already paid the HOA $4,000 to have her window shutters replaced. They said I didn't have a choice, she told me. The letter said if I didn't comply, they'd put a lien on my house. Did you vote on any changes to the architectural guidelines? I asked. She looked confused. Vote? No, I've never voted on anything HOA related. I barely even know what the HOA does besides collect dues. That was the pattern everywhere I went. Nobody had been asked to vote on anything. The board had simply changed the rules and started enforcing them. By the time I got home, I was angry. This wasn't just about my house anymore. Patricia and her board were running a scam, and people were paying thousands of dollars for unnecessary work. I called my attorney, David Huang, and explained the situation. That's textbook ultra vires action, he said. The board exceeded their authority. The changes to the architectural guidelines are void. Can I sue them? You can, but there's a better approach. Call an emergency homeowner meeting. Under Arizona law, if 10% of homeowners petition for a special meeting, the board has to hold one within 30 days. You get enough people together, present the evidence that the board acted improperly, and vote to invalidate their changes. You can probably also vote to remove the board members while you're at it. 10% of 147 is about 15 homeowners. Exactly. Get 15 signatures, submit the petition, and force them to face the community. I spent the next 3 days canvassing the neighborhood. It wasn't hard to get signatures. Once people understood what was happening, most of them were furious. Janet Rodriguez signed immediately. So did Tom and Linda Chen, who'd received a violation notice about their front door. Bob Martinez signed after I showed him the original HOA documents proving the board had acted without proper authority. By Friday afternoon, I had 23 signatures. I hand-delivered the petition to Patricia's house that evening. She opened the door in a pink bathrobe, looking annoyed. What do you want? I'm delivering a petition signed by more than 10% of Saguaro Ridge homeowners requesting an emergency special meeting to address the board's unauthorized changes to the architectural guidelines. Her face went through several interesting color changes. The board doesn't have to respond to every frivolous complaint. Under Arizona Revised Statutes, Title 33, Chapter 16, you absolutely do. You have 30 days to schedule the meeting. I'm delivering this petition with witnesses present. I gestured to Marcus and Janet Rodriguez, who were standing on the sidewalk recording everything on their phones. Patricia snatched the petition out of my hands. Fine. We'll have your little meeting, but it won't change anything. The board has the authority to manage this community, and we're going to continue doing so. Looking forward to it, I said. The meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening at the community center. In the meantime, Patricia escalated things. She sent out a mass email to all homeowners stating that anyone who signed the petition was working against the community's best interests and would be closely monitored for violations. She also sent me a second violation notice, this time claiming my mailbox post was 6 inches too tall and my front yard landscaping included unauthorized plant species. I measured my mailbox post. It was exactly 42 inches tall, the same height as when it was installed 6 years ago. I checked the original architectural guidelines. The maximum height for mailbox posts was 48 inches. As for the landscaping, I had standard desert landscaping, Palo Verde trees, agave plants, red yucca, and Mexican feathergrass, all native species, all explicitly allowed in the original guidelines. Patricia was just making things up now. I wasn't the only one being targeted. Over the next 2 weeks, every single person who'd signed the petition received at least one new violation notice. The charges ranged from absurd to completely fabricated. Tom Chen was cited for having a doormat that was the wrong color. Linda Chen was cited for parking her car in her own driveway during daytime hours, supposedly violating a rule that didn't exist. Bob Martinez was told his house numbers were too reflective. The harassment campaign backfired. Instead of intimidating people, it made them angrier and more determined to show up at the meeting. David Huang helped me prepare a presentation showing the board's unauthorized actions. We had copies of the original HOA documents, the board meeting minutes showing no community vote had taken place, and receipts from homeowners who'd paid for unnecessary work. The night of the meeting, I arrived at the community center 40 minutes early. The room was set up with rows of chairs facing a table where the board would sit. Marcus helped me set up a projector and laptop. By 7 o'clock, when the meeting was supposed to start, the room was packed. Every seat was taken, and people were standing along the walls. I counted about 90 homeowners, which was more than 60% of the community. Patricia arrived exactly at 7, along with the other 4 board members, Sharon Morrison, Vice President, Keith Donnelly, Treasurer, Brenda Walsh, Secretary, and Craig Henderson, who I realized was Patricia's husband. That seemed like a conflict of interest right there. Patricia took her seat at the front table and banged a gavel. This special meeting of the Saguaro Ridge HOA is now called to order. I understand some residents have concerns about recent enforcement actions. We'll allow a brief comment period. Actually, I stood up. Under the rules for special meetings, the petitioners get to set the agenda. We're here to discuss the board's unauthorized changes to architectural guidelines and vote on whether to invalidate those changes. Patricia's jaw tightened. That's not how this works. The board controls all meetings. David Huang stood up. I'm David Huang, representing Mr. Preston and the other petitioners. Under Arizona law and your own HOA bylaws, a special meeting called by homeowner petition follows the agenda set by the petitioners. You're required to allow discussion and voting on the issues raised in the petition. We don't recognize you, Patricia said. This is a homeowner meeting, not a legal proceeding. I'm also a homeowner here, David said smoothly. I bought a house in Saguaro Ridge 2 years ago, so I have every right to be here and speak. I hadn't known that, but it was perfect timing. Patricia looked flustered. Fine, say whatever you want. Then we'll move on to actual business. I walked to the front of the room and pulled up the first slide of my presentation. Thank you all for coming tonight. I know everyone's time is valuable, so I'll get right to the point. 3 months ago, the HOA board changed the architectural guidelines without holding a community vote. They then began issuing violation notices based on these unauthorized changes and charging homeowners thousands of dollars for unnecessary repairs. I clicked to the next slide, showing the original HOA guidelines filed in 2020. These are the architectural guidelines that were in effect when everyone bought their homes. They were filed with Maricopa County and are part of the official CC&Rs for this community. Next slide. The revised guidelines Patricia's board had posted. These are the changes the board made in February. Notice all the differences. Garage trim color changed, front door color requirements changed, mailbox specifications changed, landscaping requirements changed, dozens of modifications that affect nearly every house in the neighborhood. I heard murmurs from the crowd. People were pulling out their phones, comparing the documents. Now, here's the problem, I continued. According to the CC&RS that everyone agreed to when they bought their homes, changes to architectural guidelines require a vote of at least 70% of all homeowners. That means 103 homeowners would need to approve these changes. Next slide, the board meeting minutes from February. Instead, the board held a meeting among themselves, 5 people. They voted to change the guidelines without asking anyone else. That's not illegal, Patricia shouted from her seat. The board has the authority to manage community standards. Actually, it is illegal, David said. It's called ultra vires action. The board exceeded the authority granted to them by the community's governing documents. Any actions taken under these invalid guidelines are also invalid. I clicked to the next slide, showing a list of homeowners who'd been charged for violations. So far, the board has collected over $50,000 from homeowners based on these fake violations. Janet Rodriguez paid $4,000 to replace window shutters that were perfectly fine. Mike Thompson paid $3,000 to repaint his front door. Linda and Tom Chen paid $2,500 to replace their mailbox. The room erupted. People were yelling questions, demanding answers. Patricia was banging her gavel, but nobody was paying attention. "Order!" she screamed. "Everyone shut up right now or this meeting is over." That made things worse. David stood up and raised his voice over the chaos. Under Arizona law, the board cannot simply end a special meeting called by homeowner petition. This meeting continues until the agenda items are addressed. Then let's vote, someone shouted from the back. I vote to invalidate everything the board did. Second, several people called out. Patricia was shaking her head. You can't just call votes randomly. There are procedures. David pulled out a copy of the HOA bylaws. Actually, according to Article 7, Section 3 of your own bylaws, any homeowner can make a motion during a special meeting, and if it's seconded, a vote must be held. I made it official. I moved that all changes to the architectural guidelines made by the board in February of this year be declared invalid, and that the original guidelines filed in 2020 be reinstated as the official standards for this community. Second, Janet Rodriguez called out immediately. All in favor? David asked. A forest of hands went up. I counted quickly, at least 75 people. Opposed? Patricia, Sharon, Keith, Brenda, and Craig raised their hands. Nobody else. Motion passes overwhelmingly, David announced. Patricia stood up, her face purple with rage. This is ridiculous. You people have no idea what you're doing. The board resigned, effective immediately. Good luck managing this community without us. She grabbed her papers and stormed out, followed by the other board members. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then someone started clapping. It spread through the room until everyone was applauding. Well, David said, I guess we need to elect a new board. That process took another hour. By the end of the night, we had a new board in place. Janet Rodriguez as president, Tom Chen as vice president, Bob Martinez as treasurer, a retired accountant named Susan Clark as secretary, and me as an at-large member, though I'd tried to decline. You built this neighborhood, Janet had said when she nominated me. You know it better than anyone. We need you. I figured I owed it to everyone to help clean up the mess Patricia had made. The next morning, I sent a certified letter to Patricia demanding a refund for all homeowners who'd been charged under the invalid guidelines. David sent a similar letter from his law office, making it clear that we were prepared to sue if necessary. Patricia's response came 3 days later through her own attorney. She claimed the board had acted in good faith, that any money collected had been spent on community improvements, and that no refunds would be issued. That was a lie. I'd reviewed the HOA financial records, which as a board member I now had access to. The money hadn't been spent on community improvements. It had been transferred to an account labeled Special Projects, and from there, $42,000 had been paid to a company called Henderson Property Services. It took me about 10 minutes to discover that Henderson Property Services was owned by Craig Henderson, Patricia's husband. I called an emergency board meeting with the new board members. We sat around Janet's dining room table, reviewing the financial documents. This is fraud, Susan Clark said. She'd spent 30 years as a forensic accountant before retiring, and she knew what she was looking at. They collected money from homeowners under false pretenses, then funneled it to a company owned by a board member's spouse. That's embezzlement. We need to report this to the police, Tom said. David, who joined us for the meeting, nodded. I agree. This goes beyond a civil HOA dispute. If they were intentionally collecting money they weren't entitled to and transferring it to their own company, that's criminal fraud. I thought about Patricia's face when she'd showed up at my house with that demolition crew, the absolute certainty that she could do whatever she wanted, the way she'd dismissed every objection, every piece of evidence. She hadn't just been power-hungry, she'd been running a scam. Let's file a police report, I said. The next day, Janet, Susan, and I went to the Scottsdale Police Department and met with a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Sarah Brennan listened to our explanation, reviewed the documents we'd brought, and took notes. How much money are we talking about? She asked. Based on the financial records, they collected approximately $53,000 through violation charges over the past 3 months, Susan said. $42,000 of that was transferred to Henderson Property Services, which is owned by the HOA president's husband. We have no records of Henderson Property Services actually performing any work for the community. Detective Brennan looked at the bank statements. And you're certain these violation charges were fraudulent? The violations were based on architectural guidelines that the board didn't have authority to implement, I explained. They changed the rules without a community vote, then charged people for violating rules that weren't actually valid. We have documentation proving they knew they were supposed to hold a vote but chose not to. I showed her the email exchange I'd found in the HOA's records. In January, before the board made their changes, Sharon Morrison had sent an email to Patricia asking whether they needed to hold a community vote. Patricia's response was explicit. A full vote would take too long and probably wouldn't pass. Let's just implement the changes through a board vote and start enforcement immediately. Detective Brennan read the email twice. Okay, this gives me enough to open an investigation. I'll need to subpoena the HOA's bank records and interview the board members. This might take a few weeks. What happens if you find evidence of fraud? Janet asked. Then we refer it to the county attorney's office for prosecution. If charges are filed, it would likely be theft by fraud, possibly organized fraud depending on how involved the husband's company was. We left the police station feeling like we'd done the right thing, but also a little surreal. I'd built houses my entire adult life. I'd never imagined I'd end up helping to put an HOA president in jail. Over the next 2 weeks, things in Saguaro Ridge started to normalize. The new board sent out an email to all homeowners explaining what had happened and announcing that anyone who'd paid violation charges in the past 3 months could request a refund. We had 37 requests, totaling just over $50,000. The problem was that the HOA only had about $18,000 in its general fund. The rest was gone, transferred to Craig's company. We'll have to assess all homeowners to cover the refunds, Susan said during a board meeting. About $220 per household. I hated that idea. People who hadn't done anything wrong would have to pay because of Patricia's fraud. What if we sue Patricia and Craig personally? I suggested. Get a judgment, put liens on their assets, recover the money that way. David, who was sitting in on the meeting as our legal advisor, nodded. That's an option. It would take longer, but it wouldn't require assessing innocent homeowners. We voted to pursue the lawsuit. David filed the complaint in Maricopa County Superior Court, alleging fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion of HOA funds. We asked for $53,000 in actual damages, plus attorney's fees and punitive damages. Patricia and Craig hired a lawyer, some slick guy from Phoenix who specialized in civil litigation. He filed a response denying everything and claiming the board had acted within their authority. The case was assigned to Judge Robert Martinez, no relation to our board member Bob Martinez. The first hearing was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Detective Brennan continued her investigation. She interviewed several homeowners who'd paid violation charges, reviewed the HOA's financial records, and brought Craig Henderson in for questioning. Craig apparently didn't handle the pressure well. According to Detective Brennan, he'd admitted almost immediately that Patricia had directed him to create Henderson Property Services specifically to receive HOA funds. He'd claimed not to know the violations were fake, saying he'd believed Patricia when she told him the homeowners were genuinely in violation and the charges were legitimate. That was enough for Detective Brennan to request charges. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office reviewed the case and decided to charge Patricia with theft by fraud and fraudulent schemes. Craig was charged as an accomplice. The criminal charges changed everything. Patricia's lawyer in the civil case suddenly became much more interested in settling. He reached out to David suggesting they discuss a resolution. We met in David's office on a Thursday afternoon. Patricia and Craig sat on one side of the conference table with their attorney, a guy named Gerald Foster. Janet, Susan, and I sat on the other side with David. Gerald opened with a speech about how his clients had made innocent mistakes and acted in what they believed were the community's best interests. He said they were willing to return the money to avoid protracted litigation. Your clients are facing criminal charges, David said. This isn't about innocent mistakes. They deliberately defrauded dozens of homeowners. The criminal charges are still pending, Gerald said. Nothing's been proven. Your client's husband already gave a statement to police admitting Patricia directed him to create a shell company to receive HOA funds, David replied. That's going to be pretty hard to explain to a jury. Patricia finally spoke. I was trying to improve the community. The original architectural guidelines were outdated and didn't maintain proper standards. I was doing what needed to be done. By stealing $50,000, Janet said. By harassing people with fake violations. I didn't steal anything. That money was used for legitimate purposes. What legitimate purposes? Susan asked. Because we've been through every invoice, every receipt, every bank record. Henderson Property Services never did any work for the HOA. The money just sat in their business account until we started asking questions. Patricia didn't have an answer for that. David laid out our terms. Here's the deal. Your clients transfer $53,000 to the HOA within 10 days. That covers all the fraudulent charges plus interest. In exchange, we'll agree to a dismissal of the civil lawsuit with prejudice. And the criminal charges? Gerald asked. That's up to the county attorney's office. We're not the prosecutors. But I imagine if the victims are made whole, it might influence their sentencing recommendations. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Craig put a hand on her arm. Let's just do it, he said quietly. I don't want to go to jail over this. They agreed. The money was transferred within a week, and we were able to refund every homeowner who'd been charged. The criminal case took a bit longer. Patricia and Craig both eventually accepted plea deals. Patricia pleaded guilty to 1 count of fraudulent schemes and was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution for the investigation costs. Craig pleaded guilty to 1 count of being an accomplice and got 2 years of probation. Neither of them went to prison, which disappointed some people in the neighborhood, but at least they had criminal records, and Patricia was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. Life in Saguaro Ridge settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. Janet turned out to be an excellent HOA president, focused on actual community needs like maintaining common areas and organizing neighborhood events. The new board operated transparently, sending out detailed financial reports every month and holding open meetings where anyone could voice concerns. I stayed on the board for 2 years before stepping down to focus on my construction business. But I'd learned a valuable lesson about the importance of paying attention to community governance. HOAs could be helpful organizations that maintained property values and created a sense of community, or they could become vehicles for petty tyrants to exercise power and line their pockets. The difference came down to oversight and accountability. About 6 months after everything was resolved, I was sitting on my porch again, drinking coffee, when a car pulled up. A young couple got out and walked up to the house next door, which had been for sale. I watched them look around the yard, point at things, smile at each other. They seemed excited. New homeowners, probably buying their first house. I walked over to introduce myself. Hi, I'm Sam Preston. I live next door. The husband shook my hand. Brian Foster. This is my wife, Rachel. We just closed on the house yesterday. Welcome to the neighborhood, I said. It's a great community. Good people. And the HOA is actually reasonable, which is rare. Rachel laughed. That's good to hear. We were nervous about the HOA thing. I've heard horror stories. There was a situation a while back, I admitted, but it got sorted out. New board, much better. If you ever have any questions or concerns, let me know. I was on the board for a couple years, and I built most of the houses here, so I know the neighborhood pretty well. You built these houses? Brian asked. That's amazing. The construction quality is really good. Our inspector was impressed. Thanks. We tried to do things right. We chatted for a few more minutes, then I let them get back to their exploring. Walking back to my house, I felt satisfied. Not just because the HOA situation had been resolved, but because Saguaro Ridge was actually functioning the way a community should. People looked out for each other. The board served the residents instead of the other way around. Houses were maintained not because of threatening violation notices, but because people took pride in their homes. That evening, I got a text from Marcus. He'd been helping me on a new development project in Gilbert, and we had some decisions to make about the HOA structure we'd create. What should we do about architectural guidelines? He asked. Keep them loose or make them detailed. I thought about Patricia and her fake violations. I thought about homeowners being charged thousands of dollars for trim paint that was supposedly the wrong color. I thought about the stress and anger and division it had caused in what should have been a peaceful neighborhood. Keep them reasonable, I texted back. Clear enough to maintain standards, but flexible enough that people don't feel like they're living in a dictatorship. And make sure the amendment requirements are ironclad. No board should be able to change fundamental rules without a real vote. Got it. Also thinking we should require annual audits by an outside accountant. Make it harder for anyone to mess with the finances. Perfect. Do that. Building houses was about more than just construction. It was about creating spaces where people could live their lives without unnecessary interference, where they felt secure and comfortable, where community meant support and cooperation, not harassment and control. I'd built a lot of houses in my career, but helping to fix Saguaro Ridge had taught me that the structure of the community was just as important as the structure of the buildings. A few weeks later, I ran into Tom Chen at the grocery store. He was loading bags into his car when I pulled up next to him. "Hey Sam," he called out, "haven't seen you at the board meetings lately." "I stepped down last month," I said. "Figured it was time to let some other people take a turn." "You earned a break. Linda and I were just talking about everything that happened. It's crazy how different things are now." "Different good, I hope." "Absolutely. We actually enjoy living here now. Before it felt like we were always waiting for the next violation notice, the next fight. Now it just feels like home." That was exactly what I'd hoped to hear. I finished loading my groceries and headed home, thinking about the path that had led from that morning with Patricia and her demolition crew to this moment. The whole situation could have gone so differently. If I hadn't kept those construction documents, if I hadn't known my rights, if the other homeowners hadn't been willing to stand up and demand accountability. Patricia had counted on people being afraid, being passive, being willing to just pay whatever she demanded to avoid conflict. She'd underestimated the power of a community that decided to work together. My phone rang as I was pulling into my driveway. It was Detective Brennan. "Mr. Preston, I wanted to let you know that the Henderson case is officially closed. Both defendants completed their plea agreements, and the restitution has been paid in full." "That's good to hear. Thanks for all your work on this." "It was an interesting case. I've worked a lot of fraud investigations, but this was my first HOA scam. You did good work documenting everything. Made my job a lot easier." "I just wanted to make sure people got their money back." "Well, you succeeded. I also wanted to tell you that we've started looking at other HOA complaints with fresh eyes after this case. Turns out there are a few other boards in the area that might be operating outside their authority. Your case gave us a template for how to investigate." That was satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. Maybe the whole mess with Patricia would end up helping other communities too. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a minute, just looking at my house. The house I'd built. The house with the garage trim that was supposedly the wrong color, but had actually been perfect all along. Sometimes, standing up for what was right required nothing more than knowing the truth and being willing to prove it. Sometimes it required organizing your neighbors and demanding accountability. Sometimes it required lawyers and police and the legal system. But it always required the willingness to say no, to refuse to be bullied or intimidated, to trust that if you were in the right, you could make things right. I got out of the car and walked up to my front door, running my hand along the trim of my garage as I passed. Desert Dawn, SW7569, the exact right color, just like it had always been. Inside, I opened my laptop and checked my email. There was a message from the president of another HOA in Mesa, asking if I'd be willing to speak at their community meeting about proper board governance and the importance of following the CC&RS. Apparently, word had spread about what had happened in Saguaro Ridge. I replied that I'd be happy to help. That weekend, Janet organized a neighborhood barbecue in the common area. It was the first community event the new board had put together, and the turnout was impressive. Nearly 70 families showed up, bringing food and drinks and kids and dogs. I brought my famous brisket, which took me 12 hours to smoke but was always worth it. Marcus came with his family, even though he didn't live in the neighborhood. Bob Martinez brought his guitar and played music while people ate. Susan Clark organized games for the kids. As the sun set and people sat around talking and laughing, I looked around at the community we'd built. Not just the physical houses and streets, but the connections between people, the trust, the sense that this was a place where people looked out for each other. Patricia had tried to turn Saguaro Ridge into her personal fiefdom, a place where she could exercise power and extract money. Instead, she'd accidentally united the community in a way that probably never would have happened otherwise. People who'd barely known their neighbors now had friendships. Homeowners who'd never paid attention to HOA matters now came to every meeting. The community was stronger because we'd faced a challenge together and overcome it. Rachel and Brian Foster, the new couple from next door, came over to where I was standing. "This is amazing," Rachel said. "We've been here less than a month and we already feel like part of the community." "That's how it should be," I said. "Brian told me about what happened with the old board," she said. "I can't believe they tried to scam everyone like that." "It was a mess for a while," I admitted, "but good people fixed it." "I heard you were the one who organized everything, that you got everyone together and fought back." I shook my head. It wasn't just me. It was a lot of people realizing they didn't have to accept being treated unfairly. Once people decided to stand up, things changed pretty quickly. As the evening wore on and families started heading home, Janet came over and gave me a hug. "Thank you for everything you did. This neighborhood wouldn't be the same without you." "I just built the houses," I said. "You all make it a community. You did more than build houses. You helped us remember that we have power when we work together." Walking back to my house later that night, I thought about the strange journey from contractor to accidental HOA activist. I'd spent my career focused on the physical work of construction, framing, electrical, plumbing, finishing, all the technical details that went into creating a solid, well-built house. But a house wasn't a home without people, and a collection of houses wasn't a community without trust and cooperation. Patricia had tried to undermine that trust, to create fear and division for her own benefit. The fact that we'd stopped her, that we'd restored integrity to the community, felt like building something even more important than a house. We'd built accountability, we'd built transparency, we'd built a system where people had a voice and their rights were protected. A few months later, I was working on the new development in Gilbert when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Preston? This is Patricia Henderson." I nearly hung up. "What do you want?" I wanted to apologize. Her voice was quiet, different from the aggressive tone I remembered. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I've been thinking a lot about what I did, and I wanted you to know I'm sorry." I didn't know what to say to that. "I was wrong," she continued, "about everything. I convinced myself I was helping the community, that I knew better than everyone else. But really I was just on a power trip, and I hurt a lot of people." "You did," I said. "People trusted you and you stole from them." "I know. I'm working with a therapist to understand why I did it, why I thought it was okay. Part of my probation requires counseling." "Good. I hope it helps. I also wanted you to know that I'm paying back everyone I took money from, even though the court only ordered restitution for investigation costs. It's going to take me a while, but I'm setting up a payment plan." That surprised me. The plea deal hadn't required her to repay the homeowner since the civil settlement had already covered that. "Why are you doing that?" I asked. "Because it's the right thing to do, because I need to make this right as much as I can. I know you probably don't believe me, but I am sorry." We talked for a few more minutes. I didn't forgive her, wasn't ready to, but I could hear something genuine in her voice. Maybe she really was trying to change, or maybe she was just trying to make herself feel better. Either way, it wasn't really my problem anymore. After we hung up, I told Marcus about the call. "Think she means it?" he asked. "I don't know. Maybe. People can change, I guess. If she really does pay everyone back, that would be something." Yeah. Life moved on. The Gilbert development progressed. I made sure the HOA structure there was solid, with clear rules and strong protections for homeowners. I'd learned my lesson about the importance of good governance. Saguaro Ridge continued to thrive. Janet served as president for 3 years before stepping down to let someone else take a turn. The community became known throughout Scottsdale as one of the better managed HOAs, a place where people actually wanted to live. I kept my house with the desert tan paint and the desert dawn trim, and nobody ever bothered me about it again. Every morning, I'd sit on my porch with my coffee and look out at the neighborhood I'd built, the community we'd saved, and feel grateful for the lesson I'd learned. Sometimes the most important construction project isn't a building. Sometimes it's building a community worth living in, one decision at a time, one person standing up for what's right, one neighborhood refusing to accept being treated unfairly. And sometimes, the best foundation you can build is one of trust, accountability, and the courage to say no when someone tries to take advantage of people who just want to live their lives in peace. I never did have to repaint my garage trim. It was the right color all along.